Everyone feared the mountain man locked inside an iron cage. They called him a monster, a beast, someone not worth saving. But one young widow saw something no one else did, a broken man who had lost everything. What she did next shocked the entire town and changed two lives forever. Asterisk, like, share, and subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Asterisk Silver Creek was the kind of mountain town that looked peaceful from a distance, but fear lived quietly in its heart. Tall pine trees surrounded the valley, and mist often rolled down from the hills like a slow-moving shadow. At the edge of town, near the abandoned trading post, stood an iron cage that everyone pretended not to see, yet no one could forget. Inside it lived the man they called the Mountain Man. His real name had been lost to rumors in time, replaced by stories that grew darker with every retelling. Some said he had killed a sheriff. Others claimed he had lived among wolves and learned their ways. Children were warned to behave, or they would end up like him. Asterisk, the cage had once been used for wild animals, but now it held a human being. Rust covered its bars, and the wooden platform beneath it creaked with every step. The mountain man sat most days with his back against the iron, long hair falling over his face, his clothes torn and dirty. His body was strong but thin, marked with old scars that no one dared to ask about. Townspeople passed by quickly, throwing curious glances, sometimes spitting or muttering insults. Fear made them cruel, and cruelty made them feel safe. Asterisk, no one remembered exactly when he had arrived. It was said a group of traders had brought him down from the mountains after a violent fight in a remote camp. He had been accused of stealing supplies and injuring two men. Without a proper trial or any real questions, he was locked up as a warning to others. Silver Creek was not a place that cared much for justice. It cared for survival, order, and keeping trouble far away. Even if that meant turning a man into a living display of shame. Asterisk, Evelyn Carter arrived in town on a quiet autumn morning, riding in a worn-out wagon with only a small suitcase and a heavy heart. She was 27, a widow with tired eyes and hands that trembled when she thought no one was watching. Her husband, Thomas, had died 6 months earlier in a mining accident, crushed by falling rocks deep inside the mountain. The company paid her almost nothing, and the house they once shared was taken to cover debts. With nowhere else to go, Evelyn followed a distant aunt's address and ended up in Silver Creek. Asterisk, the town welcomed her politely, but without warmth. People nodded, asked simple questions, and quickly returned to their own lives. Evelyn rented a tiny room near the edge of town and found work sewing clothes for the general store. Every evening she walked the same dusty road, passing the old trading post without paying much attention until one day she heard a sound that made her stop. Asterisk, it was not a growl or a shout. It was a low cough, weak and painful. Evelyn turned her head and saw the iron cage for the first time. Inside, the mountain man was sitting on the ground, one hand pressed to his chest, his breathing uneven. For a moment, fear froze her in place. She had heard the stories like everyone else, but something about the way he struggled to breathe felt too human to ignore. Asterisk, she took a few slow steps closer. The smell of rust and damp wood filled the air. The man looked up and their eyes met. His were not wild or angry. They were tired, empty, and filled with a quiet kind of pain that Evelyn recognized immediately. It was the same look she saw in her own reflection every morning. Asterisk, Evelyn's heart began to race, but she did not turn away. Instead, she noticed his hands large, rough, and injured. One finger was swollen and dried blood covered his knuckles. He seemed embarrassed to be seen in such a state, lowering his gaze like a child caught doing something wrong. The crowd that usually gathered around the cage was gone. It was just the two of them in the cold mountain air. Asterisk, are you all right? She asked softly, surprising herself. Asterisk, the mountain man did not answer. He only nodded slightly, though it was clear he was not. Evelyn felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of fear and compassion. She thought of Thomas, of how helpless he had looked in the hospital bed before he died, surrounded by machines and strangers who saw him as another case. Not a person. Asterisk, without thinking too much. Evelyn removed her scarf and gently pushed it through the bars. For your hands, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, then slowly took the cloth, wrapping it around his wounded fingers with careful movements. As if afraid it might disappear, that night Evelyn could not sleep. The image of the cage replayed in her mind. She kept wondering how a town could lock a man away like an animal and call it justice. She wondered how long he had been there, cold, hungry, forgotten. More than anything, she wondered why she felt so strongly about a stranger she had known for less than a minute. The next morning, she returned. This time, she brought food, bread, and dried meat wrapped in paper. She placed it near the cage, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. The mountain man looked confused at first, then grateful. He ate slowly, like someone who had learned not to trust kindness. Evelyn sat on a nearby crate, her heart pounding with every movement he made. She realized something important in that moment. The man in the cage was not a monster. He was a prisoner of fear, trapped not just by iron bars, but by the lies people told about him. And deep inside, Evelyn knew her life had already changed. She did not know how or why, but she felt that this broken stranger was somehow connected to her own broken future. The days that followed felt different for Evelyn, as if the air in Silver Creek had shifted slightly, even though no one else seemed to notice. She continued her routine working at the general store, returning to her small room and keeping her head low, but her thoughts were always pulled back to the iron cage. Every evening she found herself walking the long way home, pretending it was by accident, just so she could pass by the trading post again. The mountain man began to recognize her footsteps. He would lift his head before she even spoke, his eyes no longer dull but quietly alert. He still didn't talk, but his silence felt less threatening now, more like the silence of someone who had forgotten how to use his voice. Evelyn brought small things, bread, water, sometimes a warm piece of cloth. In return, he offered nothing except a soft nod or a faint smile. But to her, it felt like trust slowly being built. One afternoon, Evelyn overheard two men laughing outside the store. They were talking about how the trader planned to sell the mountain man to a traveling circus that passed through the region, where he would be displayed as a wild mountain beast. The thought made her stomach twist. The cage was already cruel, but a lifetime of being mocked and chained for entertainment felt unbearable. She walked away before they noticed her, her hands shaking. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her room, staring at the one thing she still owned of real value, her wedding ring. It was simple gold, slightly scratched, but it carried every memory of Thomas. It represented love, loss, and a life that no longer existed. Tears filled her eyes as she turned it slowly between her fingers. Selling it felt like letting go of the last piece of her past, but keeping it felt meaningless if she could not use it to save another life. The next morning, Evelyn walked straight to the trading post. A small crowd had gathered as usual, some curious, some cruel. The mountain man stood inside the cage, his face unreadable, as if he sensed something important was about to happen. Evelyn stepped forward, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. I want to buy him, she said. The trader burst into laughter. With what? That sympathy in your eyes? He mocked. Evelyn didn't respond. She slowly removed the ring from her finger and placed it on the table. The room went quiet. The trader picked it up, inspected it, then smiled greedily. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded. Fine, a deal is a deal. The sound of the lock opening echoed like a gunshot. For the first time in months, the cage door swung open. The mountain man stepped back, unsure, as if freedom itself frightened him. Evelyn held her breath, expecting him to run, to shout, or to collapse. Instead, he slowly walked out, stopped in front of her, and lowered his head. It wasn't fear, it was respect, gratitude, and something close to disbelief. They walked out of town together, not speaking, but surrounded by whispers. People stared as if watching a ghost. Some laughed, others shook their heads, convinced Evelyn had made a terrible mistake. She didn't care. With each step, she felt lighter, as if the weight she had carried since Thomas's death was finally shifting. Evelyn's cabin was small and barely furnished, but it was warm. The mountain man hesitated at the doorway, unsure if he was truly allowed inside. "You're safe here," she said gently. It was the first time she had heard her own voice sound strong in months. He nodded and stepped in. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, he began to speak, just a few words at first. His real name was Caleb. He had once been a trapper who lived alone in the mountains. He was accused of theft because he refused to share his supplies with armed men who threatened him. The fight had been self-defense, but no one wanted to hear his side. Fear was easier than truth. Caleb helped around the cabin, fixing broken boards, gathering firewood, and protecting Evelyn from harsh weather. He never raised his voice, never showed anger. The man everyone feared turned out to be gentle, patient, and deeply wounded by the way the world had treated him. One evening, as they sat quietly by the fire, Evelyn realized something she had not allowed herself to feel before: hope. Not romantic, not dramatic, but simple and real. Two broken people, slowly rebuilding their lives, not because of destiny, but because one had dared to see humanity where others saw a monster.